Well, that was a great job, Patrick. Thank you very much. So I guess I do have a few points I would like to make, although you can imagine and predict that I'm going to go through them quickly, but at least they will be on the slides, and at least one of my sort of recordation functions will have been satisfied. But I do want to also take the opportunity to thank everyone for what has been an extremely rich conversation over the last 2 days. I'm just amazed at how well this went, and Claire Stroud deserves 99% of the credit, and the rest, and Doug and Tara also. I was going to say that, you didn't even need to remind me to say that. But I should reserve a little, credit for the committee, which I think put together really a great workshop with Claire. And so I think we accomplished phase one, right, of this. I think this one went really very well. Now, part of the reason for having the workshop, and obviously there's going to be some summaries that are going to be done and editing and whatnot, but I think the raw material is there, and I think the raw material is there to help the committee if there is a next phase in terms of doing a consensus study. I think we have a lot to work with in order to decide what to do and to distill and integrate this to think about a blueprint for research and policy. I have, I think it's 6 points that I'd like to try to add to the summary. I guess I'm going to need to stand over here to see it. Actually, I can do this myself, right? Sorry. So the first thing is, this is a question that Larry posed, if I remember correctly. So we have in mind the continuity of neural development and brain development over this period. There's been this obviously a really important emphasis on this in terms of adolescent development that you heard earlier, and it's had an impact really on juvenile justice policy. And the question, of course, always raised when you kind of see the what the differences between adolescence and childhood is, and adults as a whole, is that of course it's continuous, right? I mean, there's no magic about 18 either, right? And so we saw that there is some continuity here in terms of brain development that has a bearing, and ought to have a bearing, on policy. And the other observation, of course, is there have been these social changes that affect this transitional period. Obviously we heard that maybe, some of the things that have occurred, since World War II, right, maybe a return to something that was, earlier in the 20th century in terms of what the social expectations and patterns were. We don't need to take a position on that part of it, but it does seem, my conjecture and speculation about this is that what we're seeing now is going to continue for the foreseeable future, so that if we're trying to think about social policy for young adults, that we really ought to be thinking about the changes in the nature of the transitional period and what the expectations are, for the foreseeable future. I mean, and not imagining that, there will be another equivalent of World War II, as if we can even imagine that, and then some kind of, return to the expectations at that time. So, so the question that Larry asked is, assuming that these social changes have occurred and they've lengthened this period of transition, and that affects, delayed, marriage and family raising, and alters the structure of doing that, and the extension of educational period, all the things that we are aware have happened. Does this lengthen the period of vulnerability? Assuming that the underlying neurobiological factors have been the same, but obviously the period, if there was a shorter period of transition and earlier adoption of family roles, reduction of greater social controls really and constraints on some of these forces, the period of vulnerability in that respect may have been controlled, but maybe it's been lengthened by this, and maybe that's what the data show in terms of that continuous, period of high risk, behaviors. And I think that's an important observation. I mean, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to assert that that's really what's going on. But it's, I think, a really important question. And if that's an operating assumption that we might be making, it certainly calls attention to the needs of thinking about social supports and interventions, with that particular idea in mind, instead of this, other version, of the transition and independence and stability and identity has been consolidated, and now we're moving on as adults, that this is a longer period of transition. So I think, I mean, to my mind, that was a very important question to ask in terms of thinking about this topic. So you think about that, of course. Well, all right. So another important thing, obviously, in this whole discussion, has been the salient changes in communications technologies. And again, so much has been said, but I'll just, again, as somebody who is kind of, thinking and learning, over these 2 days, it certainly to me was an important, context for thinking about the challenges that we're facing. So there are tremendous opportunities here, obviously, for health services, for health promotion, for social support, as we've heard, for personal expression itself being an important part of development, during this period of time, and well-being, however we think about it. So I want to reinforce that point. Now, here is a point that was not made, and that I want to be sure that is something that we focus on. So the only touch, I think, that occurred on the responsibilities of the private sector businesses was, of course, the very critical, look at it that emerged in Bonnie's discussion of advertising, and particularly, of course, the infamous conduct of the tobacco industry. So the larger, and one thing I asked her afterwards is, of course, we do have information, and it's been studied, the marketing and promotion activities of the tobacco companies and of the alcohol companies because of the particular salience that they have for, young people, teenagers, and young adults, and a social policy of trying to discourage, consumption of these products by that group. And meanwhile, you've got, industries that are trying to promote it, right? Whether they admit that they're doing it or not. And even if they're not intentionally doing it, it has spillover effects, when they're advertising to adults of age. In the alcohol case, 21 and over, you're obviously going to have spillover effects on the young people that are doing exactly what the 21-year-olds, are doing. And similarly, of course, with regard to tobacco. So the large question that it raises that I think has to be attended to is, of course, what is the responsibility, of businesses and the entertainment media as well, because Bonnie's done a lot of work also in that area in terms of the exposures, in the entertainment media. What are the responsibilities of these, businesses and these companies to protect the health and promote the health and safety of young adults? And I put it this way in terms of our collective responsibility because there are constraints here in terms of regulation of the companies and their own expression, either their commercial advertising and in the cases of the companies, and also in terms of the entertainment media. There are important constraints in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And I mean, we're on a collision course, frankly, on this, in the one area where there has been, aggressive intervention, which is in tobacco control, to regulate advertising, to prohibit and regulate advertising. Right now, one of the proposed regulation for advertising is black or white, no color. Take away the color, take away the graphics, take away the image advertising. If you can't say it in words, you can't say it, right? And the words that you have to say can't be deceptive. So we have that, and that's in the courts being challenged. It's been struck down by one court. The other thing is, the use of the graphic warnings on the packages, to take away the package as a source of promotion and advertising for the industry and use it for the public message, which is the graphic images. And that's also been struck down by one court on grounds that this violates the company's rights to advertise their products. So, this has been an issue, and so this is the challenge that's going on in the tobacco field. But of course, it does have implications, for the other media, and certainly given the recognition that both there's the tradition of freedom and also there may be constitutional constraints as well, we have to emphasize collective responsibility and voluntary efforts on the part of, and put public pressure, on the industries to take these things into account. So I think that has to be on the agenda. We can talk about the counter-advertising. I mean, that's part of the argument about speech, is that the answer is not to restrict their speech, but to provide more speech on the other side, through counter-advertising. But of course, that's costly. And anyway, you can see there's a big policy question here, and I think it needs to be on the table here, as it certainly is with kids, and teenagers. Truly also, if the period of vulnerability for young adults is also missing. All right, well, this point has been made. I just want to make it again, right? I mean, you have the missing half. You have the missing half of the recognized half in terms of the community colleges, the two-year colleges. And I would want to emphasize, and this was just a reminder for me to say that we need to learn more about what the community colleges are doing, because we also then heard about college mental health. That's essentially four-year college mental health in terms of counseling services and so on. There's tremendous lack of access, to opportunities for counseling, even though even if they're not non-residential colleges, of course, the students are there and they can have access. And if you had some counseling, at least referral and screening and referral opportunities, you could help fill in this gap. And we just did a study of this in Virginia, which is why it's on my mind. And it's a challenge, and so I think we need to address that also. Actually, this is supposed to say mental health awareness. Doug couldn't read my writing, which I can't either. And I think that mental health awareness and crisis interventions, essentially, this should be said, because I think that we heard some about it, but I think actually it's a large issue that has particular relevance for this population, okay? So I think that's a lot of the things that we've said are large social challenges. The advertising, when I mentioned entertainment media, is one, but they have particular salience for this population because of the heightened, vulnerability, and certainly for the vulnerability with regard to mental illness onset. And our youth panel itself made the point as well about how important it is to help fellow students and teachers be aware of signs and have to change the culture so that people feel comfortable taking appropriate, interventions rather than, being paralyzed and not knowing what to do. So raising awareness and facilitating appropriate interventions is probably one of the most important things that we can do with regard to mental health policy generally and specifically for this population. So what was this? Doug, so I think the issue that I want to close with here is the issue of age. So I know what this was supposed to be. The missing rite of passage. This is fun, actually. I mean, for me to interpret my own writing, it takes the additional time. I hope Claire will forgive me for going over here, but this is the most important point, really, that I couldn't resist making this point. So that resonated with me, when that was said earlier. I think it was Richard that said it on the first day. So, there's maybe, in my experience, there was bar mitzvah, there's confirmation, there's that. Then there was high school graduation, maybe, that could have, at some point, stood for the rite of passage. It certainly can't now. For a while, maybe 18 and your 18th birthday, might have stood for the rite of passage because of the lowering of the age of majority, that occurred in the early 70s, and, the right to vote, and then all the states kind of followed along because the Constitution said you have a right to vote at 18 by reducing the age of majority to 18. But that was a really bad idea, and of course it kind of, begun to change after that, certainly with re-raising it with regard to access to alcohol, and that's why I think the age of 18 certainly isn't, the case. So now maybe it's 21, maybe the 21st birthday, and certainly I know, and certainly for, my kids, be turning 21 and, having people take you to the bar, right, was the rite of passage. Maybe that's not it really in college graduation for the kids for the half, that go to college, but of course they don't finish all in 4 years, either. So I think that's a good point. But really, to me, from a legal standpoint, it does call attention to an issue that is in the background that I just want to put on the table, which is, so what role does the law play in social policy with regard to the age lines, play in this? And just from your experience that this is a highly contextualized policy judgment. There are lots of arguments that young people can make about, well, if I can vote at 18 and whatever, and if I can go in the military, I mean, why can't I have a drink, right? So, the argument is that it should be all the same. Well, no, there's no reason in the world that it should be all the same, because these are contextualized policy judgments that have to be made, and that's relevant for juvenile court jurisdiction, adult court jurisdiction, the driving, obviously graduated licensing. So there are transitional possibilities. I mean, there could be complicated issues, and we're certainly doing it, for driving, and it could perhaps be done in other contexts also. So, so there's a lot to be said about each one of these contexts. So the reason I have tobacco up here, obviously there's a much debated question about alcohol, but there's actually in the Tobacco Control Act a direction to the Congress to commission the IOM to do a study on whether the right to the tobacco purchase age should be raised to 21. Right, and which is now 18, with the idea, you can see the public health argument for it, but, you can see that that's not a slam dunk there in terms of just thinking about what the consequences of that might be, and whether the fact that you can't sell it to somebody under 18 has implications, under 21, has implications for punishing them for having cigarettes when they're 18 or 19 or 20. I think it's a big question, and of course we talked about marijuana legalization earlier. All these same questions, are going to be addressed there. So I think that this whole set of issues is really important, and here's what I really want to be remembered for. So I think some of you of a certain age will recognize this, right? So when you turn 40, people say, oh yeah, well, 40 is the new 35 or 30, right? You turn 50, you say, well, actually 50 is the new 35, right? Well, you turn 65, as I would admit I have, is the new 50. Sounds good to me, actually. All right, so is 25 the new 18? Actually, we could have put 25 and then slash, cross out 21, right? 21, no. 25, right, is the new 18. And you and I never had a conversation about this, right? So when you think about all the roles that age and these age lines play in public policy, I've just mentioned the obvious public discussion points about this, but when we're hearing about the welfare state and the sort of modern, contemporary regulation and entitlements and eligibility ages and so on, when we were talking, earlier about education, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act goes to 22, entitlements and, under the various welfare systems, vary, but some to go to 25. We had obviously the Affordable Care Act made 26, a magic age in terms of eligibility. So there are age lines being drawn everywhere. And it seems to me that thinking about that in terms of a kind of a coherent, sense of it, again, you don't have to have them all be the same. They're going to be relevant to different social policies. But it may be that some underlying understanding of what is needed to help support young people and young adults in a transitional period of life, and particularly in the other half, that we're thinking systematically about that age is important, and that's the point I think that our speakers made also. So that's my thought. 25 is the new 18. So with that, and knowing, of course, that we have extended ourselves beyond the assigned time, I'm finished. We could adjourn this. Claire, you want to give me direction? Should I just adjourn, or does anyone else want to have the last word? What? I think we should adjourn too. I wanted that to be the last word. Okay.